So I'm glad Melissa like segued into audits because I do a lot of audits, and I think one of the questions I saw too that I was looking at is, SBOMs. When I'm working with SBOMs, and there's kind of a confusion of, all right, SBOM and soup, right? And what's the differences between them too, right? Especially in the context of 62304, where you look at, it's saying that you have to identify and classify all your soup items and throughout your product life cycle, development life cycle, so forth and so on, including risk assessments, right? And so I look at that, but I think what I what I find, especially when I audit, when I start looking at how their SBOM approach is and how they approach soup, sometimes they don't understand the difference, right? With soup is with SBOM is like looking at it from transparency perspective too, right? You're looking at everything, right? And the soup items are more, getting visibility into some of those software components and looking at maybe potential vulnerabilities and risk management, right? But I think those are the things where I work the most with SBOMs, when I'm looking at, are they well-formed SBOMs, and are they looking at the differences between SBOM and also soup, right? And then tying them all together, right? Because they are distinct, but they are related, right? And so that's why I wanted to make sure that there was a question about that I kind of show the difference between the two and how I work with SBOMs on a daily, especially with audits.
Yeah, and I'd just love to add to that. I agree with everything you said, and I think we kind of slipped a little bit into now kind of what he said before. I have an SBOM, now what do I do with it? I mean, I think we think about SBOM, and trying to utilize that information, and exactly what you said, the overload, the engineering overload, just sheer numbers. Like you look at the number of vulnerabilities that are popping up and the number that engineers have to deal with, it's overwhelming, right? I mean, and so any good SBOM management tool should help you as an engineer to prioritize those things. I think Melissa said, look at risk of the products. But I always say, and I think I've said this before in these discussions, that scoping is the best way to start. You got to start with a scoping exercise, whatever the criteria you use as an organization to scope where you're going to start, because you can't boil the ocean. So you start somewhere with maybe a product or a product line, or maybe the product that has the biggest footprint, as Melissa pointed out, and look at the risk profile there. But I would also add that there are ways to enrich the SBOM beyond just vulnerability information that you're getting from NVD or whatever, right? I mean, there are things like the KEV, the known exploited vulnerabilities. There are things like EPSS, which exploited prediction scoring system, right? And you look at those things to help you prioritize the criticality of the vulnerability too. So in other words, if something's on the known exploited vulnerability list and it's in your product, you probably want to look at that first, or very close to the top. If it's got an EPSS score where it looks like it's a really high percentile of being a breach, then you probably want to elevate that as well, right? So if you take that information and combine it with the risk profile of your products and where you want to look first, I think you have an easier job. Now, it's not an easy job, it's just maybe a little easier, right?